What's up, everybody? My name is Kalen. I am the key keeper, and today I am going to be decoding the word castrato as it relates to Uranus and everything that we have been syncretizing as it relates to the golden phallus, the unicorn, Virgin, Virgo symbolism, Homo Solaris symbolism, the idea of a eunuch and a transsexual, the Midas touch, the golden ass, the Prajapati Rohininess of Princess Donkey's skin, Mrigashira, the birth of Soma. All of these things as it relates also through Capricorn, goat symbolism, Makaras, chimeras, mermaids, spirits, semen, waters of life, water spirits, true yin, and the fact that in Asterian astrology, soul is the Hasta Nakshatra in that system, which is where Mercury would exalt. And we know through Gigi Young and Rudolf Steiner that the Mercury glyph with the horns actually truly denotes Venus, which to me it just makes a lot of sense when we think of the fact that the moon is like a mirror that reflects and refracts the light of the sun and streams it down in a nourishing way to the earth. And we see on the tree of life that the moon earth relationship, all in a straight up line, links through the sun, Uranus and Neptune, which I find that very interesting because on Gnostic Informant they had a creation story with the planets as per the Enuma Elish, but also some of the Greek, Chaos, Uranus, Gaia, Eros, Erebus, Nyx, stories. And all of these stories really got me thinking about the churning of the cosmic ocean, Rahu and Ketu as demonic, the Asura and Olympian flip that is often mentioned. For example, the fact that Venus is the god of the Asuras, and in the Greek system Venus would be Aphrodite, and we know if Velikovsky is to be believed, Aphrodite relates to the moon, which relates to Yahweh, the Tetragrammaton, Eve, Lilith, and sin, all through the notion of Lucifer, Homo Solaris, and just the Mary Magdalene mirror of the waters of space, and everything that I was trying to syncretize also with what Not All Those Who Wander Are Lost said about the golden key and the silver key, the galactic center and anti-center, all like this big brain matrix womb creatrix birth of the Big Bang theory of light, gene key 1, Anuradha, entropy. All of these things are trying to syncretize in my mind, and it's like God left the trail for me, guys, because for example, when I got into Mariah Carey, it was also me going towards the cusp of my puberty, the transitions of my singing voice happening, and also just the Svengali effect of what that voice should be used for and what comes out in terms of proper couth. I think I was trying to relate that other video of like Malkuth and the moon. And we know Taurus exalts the moon, and there's also an element of Vulcan related to that, which Hephaestus and Aphrodite, and Chitra as the grand architect, and Virgo in Asterian astrology also has that Vulcan nakshatra. So it's very, very interesting, like the trine of moon-ruled nakshatras like Rohini, Hasta, and Shravana, because Shravana also relates to Apollo, and what we know about Apollo as the principality, the god of the abyss and the god of music in the image and likeness of Luciferianism and all that we have learned on that. Gnostic Illuminati threads. So all of these things kind of swimming in my mind, with this esoteric cipher also having Uranus in the 11th house and then cutting it to produce Venus and form. And so the one aspect of Uranus is the Aphrodite sea foam, and the other aspect of it is all of it going through the cipher, through Neptune, the cosmic ocean churning, the divine horse that came out of that, Neptune's relation to Christ, the hippocampus, and the white horse that comes out of like proto black matter, the prima mobile of your imagination, and all of that relating to like the hidden hand, the soul, Mercury, Hasta, through Yin, Kundalini energy, and everything that Sivan Bowman mentioned about tantric sex magic, Aleister Crowley, black mermaids, the cult of sect, and how these things always kind of like remain going, even if you think it died out and went underground or whatever, it always is still so in your face and never went away. Just like we are gonna hear on the BBC guys, Castrati documentary. The church was very ambivalent about it, a very ambiguous response, because mutilation is against the common law of the Catholic Church, we know that, but we also know that the castrati was so popular that there literally weren't going to be members of a congregation was it not for the draw of the castrati singing. So what that documentary also says about how famous and celebrated they were, how they were really the true first celebrities of their times. Even the word celeb is in their ret or ra or retrity, like there's like a niriti type of riti type of essence, also celebrity. So, and there's a Libra element to it, which also relates to the Blavatsky cut of Virgo and Scorpio through the introduction of Libra, and we see that on Formscapes. His cipher has Jupiter in the 6th house. The cipher that I got from Slick Dissident had Libra in the 6th house. And we know Saturn is where Libra exalts, or Libra is where Saturn exalts. We know the sunset relation through Gemini and Saturn as a karaka for the 8th. And the riddle of why was 6 afraid of 7, 7, 8, 9. And we know that his cipher also has the moon in the 7th position, which relates it to everything that we think of Venus and Libra and Aphrodite in that sense, because esoterically Alice Bailey says Uranus is the ruler of Libra, Saturn exalts there, Venus is the exoteric ruler. Which is interesting because the house of goddess is Gemini, just bringing it back to the Aditi unsplit of the Punarvasu, Mula Niriti gesture of it all, and how that Caturian realm in the galactic center is a turning point. So when I plotted Mariah Carey's chart placements on the ciphers, a lot of interesting things came up as it relates to her name, the words that are in her albums, you know, like her songs, Vision of Love, To Vanishing, that was her first album, eponymously titled Mariah Carey, right? So breaking down the word Mariah, there's Mar, there's Ma, there's Ra backwards, Ram backwards, there's Rhea, there's Rhea. Rhea was the wife of Kronos, which also gets a Aditi Sink, mother of the gods. And we see in her 1969, she has the Cancer moon, and in Mastering the Zodiac, it's the Gemini Cancer cusp of Punarvasu, which in Asterian astrology is Artemis. So just that Valkyrie, stallion, wild hunt of everything my Migrashira, the stallion Migrashira searching, oh dear, went on for this Promethean journey of just my spark and everything that helped articulated within my waters of yin, my wisdom holding memory for my ego, my Lilith principle, all of that, like it's what sank in. And looking back on my videos, I could see, for example, I took screenshots while I was watching videos on just Mariah Carey's range or things like that. And in the past, I did learn about Castrati because of investigating Mariah Carey's range. So is it a coincidence that it all kind of led back down that path of recapitulation, Punarvasu, the return of the good? Because, I mean, for years that information kind of sat in my mind, very cognitive dissonant like. So it's interesting that people like Slick Dissident brings the tarot and Uranus as the full journey, full circle for me, kind of seeing the world in a very uranium way right now, that I feel like I'm getting more towards a balance point. The K in my name is 11. I have Aquarius energy, like my Sagittarius ascendant is disposited by its ruling planet Jupiter in Aquarius. So, and I have a sextile between my Pluto and my Uranus. And just where my placements are in mastering the zodiac, where her placements are as per the 1969 chart, the 1970 chart. Yeah, there's just a lot of like, for example, the one chart gives me Saturn conjunct retrograde Venus, which is very snip semen blocker in the sleep in the 12th, like the Castrati video will tell you that sometimes these kids were literally done in like that because they were expected to become the cash cows for their family. And we know Taurus and the throat and singing and all of that. And in one of the charts, Mariah does have Taurus ascendant with Mars and Saturn there, I believe. So, yeah, it's all very, very interesting. It's very interesting. So, even the moon, Neptune, when we think of the moon as Aphrodite and true Venus through the relationship of Mercury. Like last night I saw the moon, right? And it was like this crescent. And it was like I could just see the celestial bull of it all and the divine messenger of it all. And like everything my ciphers have been saying about Noon and just how the serpent of the deep connects with the rainbow serpent of above. And even the Taurus and the Cancer having a link to that. When you overlay certain ciphers through precision, like how the one becomes the other, it reminds me a lot of how QRS channel found like third away for every sign, kind of like the mental germinating process. Like Aries' process is Gemini mentally, Taurus's process is Cancer, Gemini's process is Leo. So it's very interesting how the eye, the light, the form, and everything that we know about Leo and the esoteric cipher kind of combines towards that summer solstice point of light, or the return of the light in Punarvasu, where the next nakshatra over in the Leo Navamsha Jupiter exalts in Pushya. And we know that Venus has Digbala in Cancer, we know the birth of Mercury is in Ashlesha, and we know that the Yod of Jesus Christ back in the day pointed to 29 degrees Gemini, which was where Sirius was. So all of these Isis symbolism, Nile symbolism, cosmic symbolism, pharaohs bringing the waters of life to the oasis symbolism, the brain, the claustrum, Santa Claus, Mariah Carey is the Queen of Christmas. It's also disparately connected, but in my mind I feel like I see a connection What do you guys think? Because I'm gonna try and like insert my notions of quote unquote evidence. Disclaimer, guys, these are just my um trying to not have cognitive dissonance over something that has spiritually been riding me, because I love Mariah Carey, I love mermaids, I love fantasy, I love so many just stories, right? Leo in the ninth house, but like, to which extent do those stories kind of like cover up my mirror of Homo Solaris, my holiest of holies? In which images and likenesses do I project myself consciously, unconsciously, and is it all worth it when there are magic performed on us, when there is a hidden hand, when there is a golden phallus or a golden ass or a unique priest doing the sleight of hand? We know what Shakespearean actors are, we know what these plays are, we know what we see. Even the fact that we now used to draw Angelina Jolie, my dad would say, like, those hips look very boyish. Like, your proportions, it doesn't, like, look right. So, yeah, guys, let's get into these things. And I think I want to just firstly watch the Castrati video, and then we can kind of like interject with certain comments. I have been reading up like on Wikipedia and different sources just describing her voice and just the journey of her voice and as an icon, as an archetype, as what she meant for music, who she inspired, what is her pedestal at the end of all of this, you know, because we know that in that BBC documentary they say that the fame of the castrati was really about the effect that that singer had on their audience. And we know everything that we've been learning about just Doja Cat, Beyonce, the parasocial relationship, even Whitney Houston. Like, we were eating her up until she didn't have any more to give, and we, you know, maybe like discarded her or like believed in this media story of her being an addict and an abused wife. And now Leo LeBron is saying like all of that was basically bullshit in a media smearing campaign against the relationship with Bobby Brown, because it was breaking the Svengali effect of Mr. Davis and Miss Sissy Houston and everybody who was a handler in that context for her Hollywood dream. And even looking at Whitney Houston, it's like you can see breast implants on a very masculine looking torso. I'm just gonna say it like what I see, guys. I'm truly not trying to offend anybody who's transsexual. I actually think it's a very beautiful thing to be transsexual, right? I just think it's a very sad thing if it happened to somebody unknowingly or for money or because they were dysmorphic because of whatever mermaid spirit or MK Ultra programming that just deceived and thieved them from them knowing their true Shaktis and their true incarnation purpose and having the whole role switched, and then they have to live as a character and claim to have mental diseases like bipolar and whatever else they have to do to sell other people into the narrative of buying into their world. There was literally a documentary on E! Called Mariah's World. So yeah, like, what am I feeding into? That's just my question. And can I appreciate Mariah Carey? Can I be protected spiritually from whatever might be just word plays and things that are so beyond my understanding that is probably like breaking me down with low self-esteem or it's not like I'm blaming anybody for the fact that I have low self-esteem, right? I've spoken about my parents, I've spoken about many things in my life that added to the Punarvasu beast moment of myself being in this tower moment that I am creating the jump from, with all this shock to that uranium light. And so when Boma did describe building a tower through sexual alchemy, and every time we think of the Tower of Babylon and the Whore of Babylon, and what a masturbating philosopher or a unique priest can still do with the waters of yin, even if testosterone is maybe like blocked for them. Like, can you channel it into creating this high range, prized voice that sing for the gods? We know Uranus through Aphrodite, his castration through Aphrodite creates the churning of the cosmic ocean, through which form and formlessness reveals the demiurge of Jupiter, Saturn, Juno, Monata, and Mercury, Apollo, Phoebus, and their sun, Aries, Mars. Like, all of that comes out of like the cyclops of the Neptunian cosmic ocean, the big daddy energy impregnating that galactic center creatrix womb, the whole Uranus Gaia of it all, the whole even the fact that they say Neptune brought Pluto in to stabilize the orbits, and Pluto, yeah, is in the third house opposite Neptune, so it's just a very, I don't know what, Alpha Centauri, galactic cannibalism, new age, new, like even in Alice Bailey she talks about like cancer rising for a certain people, or not that she spoke about Blavatsky's root races like that, but I think she did say that cancer rising in relation to Jewish people, which is interesting because sin, the moon, and the Allah split of that between Muslims and Jews in the Christian Mary Magdalene and the Sophia of Christ and the wisdom of God, and the Parsi hidden girl that I learned on Persian Magi. It's very Hasta soul, and it's very everything that my life is needing to figure out. Because like I have Lilith in Hasta in the tropical signs, right? I have my North Node and my Mars and my Chiron in Virgo in Mastering the Zodiac. So yeah, guys, I'm just trying to like go through my at Pure Keys lake and be like, what are the pure keys always swimming around in the subconscious of me? So let's watch the Castrati video first, and then we can listen to Mariah Carey's voice and try and compare what they were looking for in terms of like the tones that they were trying to replicate, because they did this experiment, right, trying to replicate the sound of a boy vocal track, and those dimensions acoustically resonated and projected through the cavities and resonance chambers and lung capacity of a fully grown man. And yeah, just the fact that they mention how the process works, what the lack of the secondary sex hormone production does, but how the semen and everything, it can still be retained even if like they just kind of like snip the seminal vesicles, which was the more they thought it was actually like the more humane version rather than just cutting everything off. Oh my gosh, that video was so visceral that like I saw balls in a little bowl. So, and even the fact that they put it in a bowl there, it's very symbolic, I guess. Yeah, and just even the fact that the L and Neptune, and the fact that L was, the castrator, Kronos L, to Uranus, and form came out of that, and formlessness as an abyss formed, which gives me also Gap of Kanungagat, Archon Demiurge, Lower World through the 8th Sphere, Malkuth, and the firmament all yoking Earth as this pull that they see through the moon, and the moon star and all of that. It's like the Earth is the Pandora that came out of the moon. Oh, it's just like, it's so... These stories, guys. But anyway, let's watch the Castrati video. So the video we will be watching is why the Castrati never lost their hair and grew very tall. Science explained. This is from More Plates, More Dates. And I already kind of reacted to the BBC documentary, so I'm just gonna like add that in later during the recording. I just didn't feel like I found my flow introducing the topic properly there, so I'll probably kind of like edit out my introductions there and just add it to the end of this, and then incorporate the Mariah Carey snippets of her voice and the commentaries thereupon and so on, as it relates to what they were looking for in the BBC documentary, trying to replicate what they heard on, this one wax cylinder recording of the last Castrato who sang and recorded it for the experiments purposes. It was all they really had to go on, and the descriptions that existed very romantically. Alessandro Morecci.
Haunting, if I say so myself. Now, one thing that's notable is this guy's hairline. It's been exactly the same since... handful of times at this point, in passing in some of my old videos, and basically how these children were essentially castrated prior to hitting puberty to preserve their angelic singing voices, historically. And this isn't really something that goes on now, but back in the day, to support families, if they had a child that was, a valuable asset to the family in terms of their ability to sing, having them have a flood of DHT into the system, and testosterone would consequently ruin their voice, thus limiting their money-making potential. At least that was my understanding, and I wanted to circle back and do a dedicated video to it because it has a lot of interesting overlap with some of the concepts I talked about previously about like nuclear protocols for hair loss prevention, as well as even growing as a teenager. Something very interesting is not only that the Castrati did not experience male pattern baldness, but they also grew to disproportionate height relative to their counterparts who went through puberty normally. So basically I want to go through a couple articles I found that are basically elaborate in better words than I can, because it knows it far more elaborately than I do, about their history, kind of why it happened, what the deal is, and some images of depictions of them. And even when you see the anatomy, like the skeleton of these guys, like you see the strange kind of like morphological changes that occurred with the result of testosterone, DHT, and estrogen deprivation. So essentially the Castrati would operate simply via adrenal hormones for their entire lives, and like from before puberty too. So their development through puberty was kind of interesting to say the least. So this is the first article I wanted to go into. It's what was a castrato and what did they sound like? So for a solid portion of musical history, castratos had a prominent role in operas, churches, and courts across Europe. But why were young boys forced to undergo the gruesome operation? How did it affect their voices? A castrato was a male singer who was castrated before puberty. The immediate effect on their voice was that they retained the high notes and range of their immature voice, but the operation also had a variety of other effects. The lack of testosterone meant that the singer's bones didn't harden, so their bones usually grew unusually long. So you'll know about growth plate fusion. You'll know, at least in general, like the mechanism behind the blunting or the stunting. It's not stunting of your growth, but just how your body like physiologically shuts off and tells you to stop growing in height, and you know your bone development in terms of length, etc. during your upbringing as you're flooded with hormones. It's the result of testosterone aromatizing into estrogen in boys. So the lack of testosterone, and when they're saying the lack of testosterone, they more so mean lack of estrogen, like in terms of actually stopping the physiologic process where it should have been. It's an estrogen mediated cascade. So the testosterone is the precursor to the estrogen that ultimately is the kind of like off switch in this equation. So their bones usually grew unusually long. So castratos were either A, very tall, and B, had very large rib cages, giving them a vast amount of breath capacity. Castratos or castrati, or castrati, or as it should technically be, could wow audiences by holding notes for a superhuman amount of time, as well as singing higher than a naturally matured male voice could. So this is a portrait of Italian castrato singer Farinelli by, anyway, so what is the history of the castrati? In 400 AD, in Constantinople, the Empress Aelia, I'm like, I feel like a movie narrator right now. In Constantinople, the Empress Aelia Eudoxia had a eunuch choir master, Bryson. It's a fucking sick hoss name for a eunuch choir master. They have no balls. My name's fucking Bryson. Side note, eunuchs were castrated after puberty, so the operation didn't necessarily have an impact on their voice. Okay, so we're talking about eunuchs right now, not castrati. But castrato singers first appeared in Europe in the mid-16th century. In 1589, a papal bull was even passed ordering that the young boys and falsetto singers of the choir of St. Peter's in Rome be replaced by castratos. Castrato singers appeared in Paris, Munich, as they also made up the high-voiced parts of the Sistine Chapel choir. The operation was never legal, however, so it would have to be done by decidedly dodgy surgeons, and families came up with complex backstories to the accidents that had befallen the boys, falling off a horse to being attacked by a wild boar. So this is a pair of castratori held in front of a painting of Italian castrati singer, something that I can't pronounce. So this is I don't know, the tool they used to castrate them. The golden age of the castrati. But the golden age of the castrati came in the 17th and 18th centuries when they became the stars of the opera stage. Francesco Bernardi, or Senesino, as he became known, was born in 1686. I'm like laughing at my own inability to say these fucking names, and went on to appear in many of Handel's works, including the operas Giulio Cesare and Rodelinda. One contemporary account says he had a powerful, clear, equal, and sweet contralto voice with a perfect intonation and an excellent shake. His manner of singing was masterly and his elocution unrivaled. He sang allegros with great fire and marked rapid divisions from the chest in an articulate and pleasing manner. Wow, what a fucking description. Imagine saying that sentence. Like in real life, like actually saying, like, I guess I say some ridiculous shit, so never mind. Farinelli came a little later, but quickly rose to become one of the most famous musicians of his age. Born Carlo Maria Michelangelo Nicola Broschi in 1705, his parents probably decided to find someone to operate on him as a result of his father's death. Having a castrato in the family could bring in a lot of money. So let's see. Okay, so this is the image that kind of like, I was like, oh shit, this is kind of weird and interesting. And this is like a depiction of the tall lankiness of this castrati by the lack of testosterone and estrogen. One musician who heard him sing in Milan in 1726 said Farinelli had a penetrating, full, rich, bright, and well-modulated soprano voice with a range at that time from the A below middle C to the D 2 octaves above middle C. His intonation was pure, his trill beautiful, his breath control extraordinary, and his throat very agile. So that he performed, imagine saying your throat's agile. Sounds like something I'd tell some chick. You got an agile throat. So anyway, that he performed the widest intervals quickly and the greatest ease and certainty. Farinelli also performed music by Handel and went on to become a favorite of European royalty. He was hired by Queen Elisabetta Farnese, I don't fucking know, of Spain to cure the depression of her husband, Philip V. So a satirical drawing of Senesino, Baronstadt, and soprano Francesca Cuzzoni in the center. Okay. So anyway, this is one of the pictures I thought was interesting anyways at the time when I first saw it. I didn't read the full thing, but anyways, it's sort of like depicting how disproportionately like tall and weird the bone structure is of the castrati. So the last castrato, the last role to be written for a castrato was that of Armando in Maber's Il Crociato in Egitto. And castration was made illegal after the unification of Italy in 1861, but it wasn't until 1878 that Pope Leo the something, which I should know this, but I don't, banned the church from hiring castrati. And the official end came in 1903 when Pew, the something that I should also know, but I don't, declared whenever it is desirable to employ the high voices of sopranos and contraltos, these parts must be taken by boys, according to the most ancient usage of the church. Alessandro Moreschi was the last castrato to sing in the Sistine Chapel Choir, and an astonishing recording survives him of singing. Made in 1902, he would retire just a few years later in 1913 and died in 1922. So this recording isn't Moreschi in his prime, but it's the closest we'll get to hearing a voice that has disappeared forever from the classical world. So this is the last castrati, and I think the only one ever actually recorded. Haunting, if I say so myself. Now, one thing that's notable is this guy's hairline. It's been exactly the same since he was a boy, which is interesting. So he had this like this section up here that kind of like went up, even though it wasn't like traditional recession. It was just this thing. Anyways, so no hair loss for these guys, which is interesting. And it sort of is like harks back to essentially what finasteride is doing is like making like a more toned down version of a castrati, essentially. Like you're literally like wiping out a significant chunk of the DHT, which if you had finasteride in somebody prepubescent, they wouldn't develop like this, but it would be like sort of halfway between getting to where you need to be and the castrati. Like you'd end up with like immature penis, not fully developed masculine features, blah, blah, blah. It would be just a bad outcome if you're using this in a prepubescent state. So you can just imagine, wiping out all androgens entirely. Like there's like no sexual differentiation. Well, there is sexual differentiation, but it's based on just like what you've been genetically given, not the androgens actually like pushing you to where you should be. So it's kind of like these, I don't know, it's kind of like halfway developed like men that aren't actually men yet because they were sort of in a hormonal state of a boy and looked like a boy at the time based on, androgen levels and, the sexual differentiation that happens from age 0 to whatever. But once they get castrated, they never get that big surge of androgens that then, causes all the massive changes and, facilitates the process by which would eventually result in growth plate fusion, where you stop, growing in height and whatnot. So these guys would have interesting anatomy from a skeleton context, I guess, and their voices, notably, no viralization of the voice. So normally, if you take, even women who compete at, top, physique shows and whatnot, they take like even a little fucking dose of Anavar for too long and too high of a dose, and all of a sudden, voice is changing. They take too much Nandrolone for too long. Voice is changing. Like minuscule things that a guy could otherwise get away with, 10 times more of. Like the amount of androgens it takes to actually take you from sounding like a castrati to like pushing you into puberty state is not that much. So these guys are like full blown wiped out androgen wise, with just trace amounts from their adrenals. So it's almost like it's not like a menopausal woman almost, but before puberty for a male, but it's sort of like, that's like the closest natural hormonal state you could really like, I don't know. Well, I guess prepubescent. They basically just stay like prepubescent like forever, even though they...
Didn't Mariah Carey say she's eternally 12? She said she is eternally 12, guys.
Continue to grow in like an adult chronological timeline. The androgens never actually facilitate the getting to where they need to go, sexual differentiation, like finalization wise. So anyway, the second article I wanted to look at was this Daily Mail article, and the reason I had it separately, I didn't even have it loaded up, is because I got fucking nuked with advertisements last time I opened it, and it like broke my computer. So I'm trying to avoid this. It's like, oh man, this fucking website's a nightmare, dude. No, I don't want notifications. Breaking news from every angle. Fucking pop up about Extinction Rebellion activists. No, I don't care, dude. Fuck off. We see you're using ad blocker. Holy shit. It's just like, fucking ad here. Fucking ad here. Fucking hook over here. Slap you in the fucking dick over here. Just like nonstop with this shit. So I'm going to take my ad blocker off just for you guys. So here we go. We're going to Daily Mail with no ad blocker, guys. This is some risky shit. Okay, here we go. Load. Today's top video. Let's get the fuck out of here. If I like news and showbiz, you'll love this. Fuck off. Like you literally close an ad, then it's like, why are you closing the ad? Like, open it back up, bitch. Another one pops up. Fuck you. I'm trying to read your article. Do you want me to stay on your site?
What the fuck? Yeah, guys, that was very interesting. Now I kind of just want to look at the other article, the other video rather, and then I'm going to just try and synthesize all of this, right? So comment down below if you find it interesting, revelatory, distasteful. I don't know. I personally, I just don't know what to do with this information, but I just also don't feel like I can sit on it from the astrological, esoteric perspective of what I've been deciphering and just what my personal journey has been in terms of these archetypes that are so near and dear. Tonight we are going to be deciphering the word castrato. Using the cipher that we created, we see that the C finds its relationship to the Aries-Taurus cusp happening in the crossing of the 12th into the 11th house, and we find the planet Venus there. The A is found within the segment denoting Aries energy, kind of at the midpoint of what is solar energy, 9 energy coming out of Pisces energy. The A is heading towards the Aries, and the Sun is there. It is technically also still in the 12th house, but very close to the ascendant point as well. So the S, right, is in what appears to be the sixth house, in the second half of that, I almost want to say deacon split or hore. It's on the cusp of Libra, like where Libra begins. So at the cusp of Virgo and Libra, and we find the moon having dominion over the S and the sixth house. The T we find also in the sixth house in another section of Libra, and we find that it has Jupiter energy relating to the T. That's interesting. Jupiter. The A, once more, we find coming out of Pisces heading towards the cusp of Aries. So the A is like a Revati, Mercury, androgyne, divine Venus, almost. So it's just interesting, the relationship of Venus to the Sun and Aries, and Venus ruled nakshatras like Bharani, and the 12th house, and the fact that we see a certain cut there already. So the R we find opposite the 9, domiciling the moon and conjunct the descendant. The A we already discussed again. The T we already discussed, having the Jupiter Libra 6th house influence. The R we already discussed. The A, the T, and the O we find on the Virgo Leo cusp going into the 8th house, domiciled by Mercury. So that is an interesting thread of just how the word castrato plays itself out. It sees Venus in its 12th, rising the ABC out of the 9th aspect of itself through Aries going into Taurus of Pisces. We see the A relating to the Sun, the rising Sun, the 12th house aspect in relation to that, and that it is the first letter out of 9. So that's interesting, and it's also the vernal equinox, bringing Pisces into Aries. The S is lunar, 6th house related, Libra cusping, or rather like what would be a 0-degree Libra. So cusping Virgo, very much the S as the junction point, and the split Blavatsky mentioned, and the relationship of Aphrodite to the moon Velikovsky spoke about. Whereas Venus is Athena, which is interesting because the A is a Aries sun symbolism going into Venus. And you know that Athena and Mars on the Enneagram are both ones, perfectionist, and Zeus, the 7 enthusiast, becomes that, which is interesting in terms of how it relates. The fact that the moon through the 7th house comes from Mercury, or Mercury comes from the moon, and when the moon Mercury split is separated from each other, we have Jupiter and Saturn. So yeah, what does that say about the S though at the 0 point Libra, lunar and 6 house cusp onto shading energies with a split U Jupiter energy? We can also see, for example, that the R is literally conjunct the descendant, which is where the focal point of meeting the other would intersect with your representation of yourself, right? Libra R, it's your areas I am projected outside of you as it relates to the other. So it's interesting how through the 8th house you bring the Leo into that through Mercury. And what my astrologer says about Virgo attenuating for Leo in the normal way that the is around. So that's interesting. Just in terms of what we said about Soul and Virgo and Yin and the Sun and Hebrew, Leo being a water sign. So that's very interesting. Because we have heard the Sun is feminine. You have also Jupiter and Saturn as feminine. We have heard Venus as masculine. So it's very interesting. Then yeah, the letters basically repeat themselves, but the O is the Mercury at the Leo Virgo cusp, from the 8th going to the 7th, or the 7th going to the 8th. Yeah, guys, comment down below. Do you guys think the word castrato tells the story just in terms of like what we know Venus as it relates to semen tells the story, how we know of Aphrodite and Uranus tells a story in relation to Castrati. And just in terms of the voices that builds the towers to heaven, bringing that Taurus in through the Gemini and the form and the emotional projection of Cancer, you know, like like the word sing, for example, has the S of the moon, the I of form, the N of Leo Mercury, and the G of Uranus Gemini. So look at that, what the word singer means. What does actor mean? Actor is a 12th house sun and Venus on the cusp of the 11th house, seeing the Jupiter Libra STU split of the self as it relates to the 6th aspect. The T, the O is, so what is splitting the Mercury Virgo from the Mercury Leo? And where's the R? The projection point, or the 7th house point of the descendant with the moon again. Yeah, it's very interesting. Let's see, what does the word belt spell? Belt is Venus with this Aries flavor, 12th house flavor. It is the E of Uranus through an 11th house flavor and Taurus flavor. The L is literally the Neptune Cancer Leo junction point of the 9th, and the T is that Jupiter Libra 6th house point. So belting literally brings Uranus
breathing control has never been at best, but it's still good.
out through like the spiritual outpour of singing through Venus and Aries in the 12th house. And all that Aries is supposed to mean as a cardinal energy. Belting brings the Uranus Neptune to the Jupiter from Venus. So yeah, what is the word range spell here? Range is Moon, Sun, Mercury, Uranus. That is the range. What is the word soprano spell? That is Moon, Mercury, Moon, Sun, Mercury. So Moon, Sun, and Mercury, soprano. Interesting. What does Alto spell? Sun, Neptune, Jupiter, Mercury. What is what else is there? Voice. What does voice spell? Voice is 5th house Jupiter, 8th house cusping Mercury, I, Gemini Cancer cusp of form, Venus, Aries Taurus cusp, C, E, Uranus, Taurus, 11th house. Yeah, even the EFG and like the fact that those are like money notes for like the belting voice that has been trained to do the mixed voice thing. They call it like mixed voice, where it's like blending head voice or both falsetto voice singing into the lower registers and like bridging that tessitura. Like it's all like those are the money notes for not only like in operas and arias and so on, but even like in pop music, those are really kind of like, most songs are written to kind of like, if a singer has that range, they are written to like peak with the EFG as the money notes. So yeah guys, who can still sing a G5, who can still belt a high F or a high E, or even just like go from the C in the 5th octave to the C in the 6th octave, right? Can you see it? Wow guys, it's so like, what is a whistle notes? Let me see. Whistle is Saturn in the 5th house, form Gemini, Cancer cusp, but more in Gemini in the 10th house. So the H and the I is form there. CW is Saturn in Scorpio in the 5th.
She has the skill to switch from middle register to upper register very shamelessly.
The S is the moon. In the 6th, the T is Jupiter in Libra. In the 6th, the L is Neptune on the cusp of the 9th, between Leo and Cancer. And the E, the T is Jupiter again, and the E is Uranus in Taurus. It's just so interesting, like everything that I've heard about Taurus ruling the throat, Taurus being a prominent placement for good singing or a good second house, or aspects from the 12th to the 2nd, or from the 11th to the 2nd, or the 10th. Like, these are the types of aspects that kind of like show you that you are on the world stage, you're known for your voice, right? And yeah, like it's very interesting, I think. I don't know, guys. It's like, is it a we can't hide it anymore situation? You know, looking back at some of my favorite singers, checking for like the body of a castrato, seeing whether they have the long arms, or like a bigger, more barrel-chested appearance of a bigger lung capacity, or something like that, or like, is there an indication like that their bones didn't fuse properly from growing rather tall, because you don't have the blockers that the testosterone would provide naturally as a secondary sex characteristic byproduct of that hormone being produced and circulated through your shukra dhatus and all that. So it's interesting how we have suspected castrato Mariah Carey, have Saturn conjunct Venus, we have Saturn conjunct Mars, we have Mars conjunct Neptune, we have Moon conjunct Neptune. And what we see about just the relation of the hippocampus, the pineal, the Christ, cerebrospinal fluid, Neptune, semen, Capricorn, Sagittarius, the orgasm, it's very, very fascinating, guys. It's truly, truly, like, my mind was blown when I just had the intuitive feeling to overlay the ciphers like that, because yeah, it's like when I didn't have formscapes and that scheme to color in the background, I was kind of like just remembering, okay, this is exoteric rulers, this is esoteric rulers for sun, this is what Greenstone Lobo said, this is what somebody on the Pi team said, this is what I learned from Alice Bailey, this is what I learned just from experimental intellects like Slick Dissident, who uses the Enneagram and the tarot cards and stuff like that. They also kind of try and figure out what I'm trying to figure out, which is like, where do all these things come from? And like, if we can't incorporate Velikovsky's cosmogenesis theory into the birth of our archetypes, like, where did Mars get a scar or get the associations of a warrior, or Venus as a mother goddess, or Saturn as like a father time, or Jupiter as like a prince or a king? Where did we get it, guys? And like, how do we know that it is consistent in terms of like the tracing of things etymologically, when, you know, we can see the application of the as above so below in people's charts, in how their narrative, like the words and the archetypes and stuff that make that world, right? Like the words that make Mariah's world. Rumors notwithstanding, transvestigations notwithstanding, suspicions that, here's the thing, guys, like I'm still open-ended on it, because I'm just like, I don't know. But what I do know is that When I was a child, I tried drawing Angelina Jolie so much because I was, like I said, I was obsessed with a lot of craft. And I remember drawing her hips and shoulders. Like she had this yellow shirt on. She had kind of like a panty, and like you could see the tattoos and everything like that. And I still remembered like what she was quoted in the Wikipedia article saying about her tattoos. Like one of them is like a Latin proverb which says, quid me nutrit me destruit. Like what nourishes me destroys me. So, and my dad asked me like, aren't those hips a little man-ish? Aren't those proportions looking a little funny there? And uh, and I could recognize that what he told me was just, notwithstanding anything that could have like tainted me receiving that as truth at the time. I always remembered that like, yeah, one day I'm gonna like prove you wrong that this is not a man, because he like I think he outright told me like it looks like you drew a man. So did I. What's up everybody? My name is Kaylin and I am the key keeper. Tonight we are going to expound upon the work that we have been doing as it relates to esoterically deciphering words. We are going to be looking at words like Uranus, Castrato, voice, register, belt, whistle, range. We are going to try and look at as many words as we can as it relates to singers, but because I want to bring clarity to the notion of, do castrati still exist, and is it something that just kind of like went underground? There are many things that we know once upon a time it was a very famous and popular thing, and then once the public became sufficiently informed as to how appalling it is, it becomes outlawed, it becomes, against the mores and the social policies and the justice. But we also know that the hidden hand and the elite in the Shatabisha realm of those Rehuvian demonic circles, they just kind of take the knowledge underground and keep perpetuating it, keep doing it more deceitfully, more duplicitously, with a better sleight of hand, right? And I just have to wonder, what does all of that have to do with the notion of Hollywood and everything that we are learning about the virgin monoceros, the cornucopia, the golden phallus, everything that relates to mermaid spirits, Makaras, genies, gifts that are channeled, wealth, prosperity, DNA, magnetism, divine children, moon children, Christ children, rainbow children, and all of that, because we are trying to understand all these words and not get, cut off within ourselves because one word like rainbow, or, like there are just certain words that are so loaded and co-opted with all these connotations that it becomes so discombobulating to try and even like use those words, And if you know anything about like how the edge is taken off it, so that they, like, where the word police comes from, right? So just the pole ice of that freeze right now again. But the idea of a castrato and having a voice preserved in a way that is venerated as the sacrifice to God, right? Because we know that castrati was birthed in a religious context, singing for the gods. We have these phrases today like, oh, she sang to the gods, or she took us to heaven. Like, there are reasons why these words in Hollywood aren't just words. It's not just randomly that these words are chosen for scripts or for a stage name or for a album. Like, I think of the whole story of Whitney Houston and the movie that came out and how they used the song Home lyrically. Oh, that got me deep because I was like, damn, they already told us how it was gonna go. I know you're listening, God. Won't you please try not to make it hard to know I shouldn't believe everything that I see? Wow, it's deep, guys. So I just wanted to first of all set the stage and not just go on blabbering. So I want to kind of like play a little clip about castrato or castrati, and this is from the channel Farinelli, and it is a BBC4 doc titled I Castrati Part 1. Okay, Part 2 is here in the description, so hopefully we can listen to that as well. And I will try and share the video as well so that you guys can go watch it for yourself. But I'm probably gonna like interrupt at some places just because I need to keep up with my brain and not forget what I wanted to say as the thoughts came. So let's listen to what the official narrative is on castrati.
Your young servant Silvestro Britoni, rejoicing in a voice sufficiently good to practice music and wishing to retain it, begs your serene highness to make it such that he is without those instruments which would allow the change of voice to take place.
During the 18th century, as many as 100,000 small boys were castrated to preserve their high singing voices. Of these, a mere handful became the most famous singers of the age. The world's first international superstars, they were perhaps the greatest virtuoso singers ever heard on earth, the castrati. But the mature castrato voice didn't sound like a child, nor did it sound like a woman. Nothing in the whole of music is as fine as the fresh young voice of a castrata. No woman's voice has the same firmness, the same strength, and the same smoothness.
That is interesting because when you hear what is described about certain singers when they first hit the scene, it's like the magnum opus of this process, you know, just as not only like a medical marvel or a hypnotic, magnetic, money-making superstar ability, that we know, for example, there are many handlers around the so-called divas and prima donnas of our world stage in this talent, this very rare and unique gift that has been made as a manifestation of your dedication to God and the church, building that voice as a sacrifice. We see that many of these young boys were from poor families, or they were trained and castrated with the hopes of becoming world famous. It's very competitive. It's very, what was the Mickey Mouse Club? If they already knew the stars that was gonna come out of there, right? What is Revati as a Nepo baby when like all of these connections are already like set out there at the end of the line to just choose a role to play, and we will create a world stage for that. It's very interesting, guys.
And it didn't sound like a male countertenor or falsettist. In this film, we're going to explore the sound and the world of the Baroque operatic castrati.
That's interesting that it doesn't sound like a countertenor, which, if we look at the notes on the cipher E, F, and G, they are Uranus money notes, and Uranus was a castrato in the sense that he was castrated. And we know that Aphrodite is associated with beauty and harmony and divine form, which we also know through Apollo and Adonis, becomes manifest even in Tammuz and Dionysus, which I believe enigmatically that is a Neptunian 3. And Hermes relates to a 5, which is interesting how the 5 and the 9 is beginning Aries. I know 5 and 5, but the spiral of 5 and the 9 also has that resonance for me. And especially since Mars rules the vibration of 9, and we think of just like the spirals and electric plasma streams, and if you watch the Thunderbolts project animation of Velikovsky's theory, and like how the veil of Venus or the seashell, like all the different forms that on the petroglyphs and stuff like that is charted, or in caves or something like that. It's very interesting, and because I'm just thinking of like the notes that was always kind of like the hit or miss, and the money making notes, it was that E above C5, and we see the C is Venus. So Venus going back to Uranus territory, and this whole singing for the gods notion. It's very interesting that those climax notes to these songs would be E, F, and G in Uranus's territory, leading up to the perfect form that is venerated at the midheaven point.
And in a unique scientific experiment, we'll attempt to bring something of this lost voice back to life.
For the whole of my adult
My name is Kaylin, I am the key keeper, and tonight I want to do my due diligence just in terms of mapping the golden thread with all the connections that we have been working with. So maybe I'm going to be an ass, but I just wanted to continue the thread of Uranus, Castrato, monoceros, Lucifer, Apollo, music. The cipher says the EFG are notes of Uranus between Taurus and Gemini, which is very interesting because how it ties into Punarvasu moon Mariah Carey as per her 1969 birth chart, the idea of Castrati, the Venus retrograde conjunct Saturn that she has in the 12th house, and everything necessary to build a voice through the alchemical process of sexual magic, tantra, the golden phallus, and the Midas touch, leading to the magnetism that is the divine androgyne as per these Hollywood rituals, putting it on stage for us as the actors and actresses of our shake and spear to just what appears to have us shaken and calling it shook and singing to the gods and divas and prima donnas. How does all of this relate to what we know about Castrati? So this is by the channel Farinelli, and it is a BBC 4 doc titled I Castrati Part 1.
Your young servant Silvestro Britoni, rejoicing in a voice sufficiently good to practice music and wishing to retain it, begs your serene highness to make it such that he is without those instruments which would allow the change of voice to take place.
During the 18th century, as many as 100,000 small boys were castrated to preserve their high singing voices. Of these, a mere handful became the most famous singers of the age. The world's first international superstars, they were perhaps the greatest virtuoso singers ever heard on earth, the Castrati. But the mature castrato voice didn't sound like a child, nor did it sound like a woman. Nothing in the whole of music is as fine as the fresh young voice of a castrato. No woman's voice has the same firmness, the same strength, and the same smoothness. And it didn't sound like a male countertenor or falsettist. In this film, we're going to explore the sound and the world of the Baroque operatic castrati. And in a unique scientific experiment, we'll attempt to bring something of this lost voice back to life.
For the whole of my adult singing life, I've been fascinated by the castrati and the extraordinary music that they sang. These kings of the 18th century operatic stage were the richest, the most highly sought after, the most extraordinarily virtuosic, the most pursued in many ways of all the singers we've ever heard. And for
That is very interesting, guys. Very, very interesting. We will discuss that afterwards.
200 years now, they've been extinct.
Have
The
they
thing
though?
that made the castrato voice special appears to be the effect that that singer had on the audience.
the effect that that singer had on the audience. Thinking of Uranus and the idea of genius and the idea of enchantment through the outpour of the waters of life, through the voice and Aquarius, and Shatabishak being a key as the Aegean and the muses and the nymphs and the sirens who had the most beautiful voices, and the golden phalluses that through a Saturnian link of castration brings the sea foam back to Uranus.
If one can understand something about what the special nature of that sound was, it will help us understand what it is that communicates from one human being to another.
Singing for the gods, right?
To do this to a child when every single moment, every day of their lives will be frankly adversely affected by their physical appearance, their early osteoporosis, their lack of an ability to reproduce, it seems to me really not emotionally cost effective.
That is very interesting, especially in terms of what we hear, just the cult nature of what the families of famous people, especially born into generational fame or wealth like Revati often is, born into those situations where they have the connections into the industry. So it's very interesting. These singers are often telling us that they have been singing since they were young. Their mother or somebody who loved them trained them or inspired them or sacrificed something for them to be able to do this. There's all these encoded references in a very sacrificial way, harkening back to what would happen to young children as is being explained in this documentary. You know, they would be the way out, the ticket out for their family. They would be the hope of turning the lead into gold. Alchemically, we know the great work manifests with the Ten of Pentacles.
Jealous, despicable, fierce, effeminate, gluttons, covetous, cruel, inconstant, suspicious, furious, insatiable. They cry like children if they're left out of an entertainment. Well, the knife has indeed made them chaste, but this chastity is of no service to them.
That is very interesting because Mariah Carey is known for being very chaste. You know, she used to say she could count all the men she's been with on one hand and Eminem is on the hand. So that's very interesting, and also just the personality that she just described, that very emancipation of Mimi personality, being very demanding, very I am the star. Handle.
Nicholas Clapton,
Handle
a
it.
countertenor and castrati historian, is curator of a new exhibition in London devoted to the German composer Handel and his castrati.
Handel was the first great composer to write Italian opera in England. Handel was absolutely the...
It's so funny, Mariah Carey said that her mom used to rehearse different arias, and I believe it was Rigoletto that she mentioned. It's just interesting how Rigoletto was also mentioned in Clay Nakti's video of Punarvasu. And all of this bringing it back to the 1969 chart, which I feel like tells the story of a castrati better in terms of the Venus retrograde and the whole semen retention notion of building a voice, a towering voice, building a range, building all these abilities to be that which will captivate an audience like that. And just the Uttara Bhadrapada karma of it all, this Cinderella bride, all of these tropes have applied to Mariah Carey, who is Shatapisha ascendant and Punarvasu moon according to the 1969 chart.
Business as an opera composer, and as such had enough clout to hire the very finest singers.
And we know Aquarius and Ganymede is the cupbearer of Zeus,
Including some of the greatest castrati the world has ever known. Caffarelli, Senesino, Carastini, Guadagni, the only one he never got hold of.
The Cara, interesting. Is it a stage name harkening back Carrie? We know that she had a particular reason for that stage name. I think her mom named her that also. It's interesting.
Was Farinelli.
She was named after, they call the wind Mariah, or they named the wind Mariah, a musical, is it Pull Your Wagon or something like that? I'll have to check again, but it's very interesting.
I'd like you to meet three gentlemen I like to think of as friends of mine. There's Farinelli and Senesino and Guadagni by the window. Farinelli never worked for Handel. Senesino did for about 15 years, and here he is on stage in Handel's Rodelinda, about to sing the most famous aria from that opera, Dove sei. Guadagni was much younger than the other two singers. He was described as a wild and reckless singer, and was accused of quite a few amorous adventures while he was in London. He was such a good actor that eventually he was famous as Glux or Fea. Well, a Baroque opera fanatic might like to make out that castrati were specially invented to sing lots of notes on an 18th century stage. This is, of course, nonsense. Castration has been used as a punishment, as a means of subjugation for thousands of years. We certainly know of eunuch choirs in a Christian context as early as the 4th century in Constantinople. And
Unique choirs.
there they flourished for more than 800 years, until the time of the Fourth Crusade, when Constantinople was sacked by the forces of Western Christendom. And the castrati, who had been singing there with great fame and considerable scandal, suddenly disappeared off the face of the earth.
But 400 years later, castrati suddenly reappeared in Italy. In 1589,
See, these things always kind of disappearing and reappearing. Very Punarvasu.
Pope Sixtus V reorganized the choir of St. Peter's. Castrati would now take the high parts that had previously been sung by either boys or falsettists.
false.
The high parts. It's very interesting because Mariah Carey is known for her upper register.
Falsetto means a little false voice, which is really grossly unfair, because there's nothing false or unnatural about a falsetto voice. It's a perfectly normal function of any adult male. And the irony is, however, that it was the castrati who came to be referred to as the natural soprano, soprani naturali, which seems very strange to us.
That's interesting because I read an article once on Mariah Carey's voice where her voice was described as a natural soprano, a natural, like she had no breaks, she had no register breaks, like she could go from the contralto to the coloratura soprano range without any losing like weight or coloring, or the timbre of her voice stayed consistent. She was able to maintain the tone, so she was described as having a natural mixed voice. I think the article even like doubted whether she had nodules because she would not have been able to have the vocal stamina and consistency that she had in her prime if she did in fact have nodules. So maybe the nodules are a narrative that's like a little deeper in code, because we do know nodules are growths. They're akin to like a polyp, and any growth that it could even potentially be cancerous is related to Jupiter, and we know Jupiter exalts in Cancer in Pushya Nakshatra, which is all about nourishing growth, the way mother's milk does. And we saw on the rainbow serpent cipher that the Taurus and the Cancer comes together with the sun, and overlaying that on the esoteric cipher with the eye. It's very interesting how form comes out of Uranus and Neptune. We know Neptune has horse and cyclops symbolism, which also brings it to like the orgasmic galactic center, golden phallus, penetrating Virgo, golden key Ophiuchus, all of that. So yeah, and why does the sun exalt in a Ketu little nakshatra in a Gemini Navamshapada, when we know Aditi in the summer solstice point of Punarvasu is split in her nourishing and destructive aspect through Niriti, and which is Mula. It's very interesting because the height of Ketu in material accumulation would be Jeshta, which Mariah Carey in her 1970 chart has Jeshta moon, and Neptune in Sagittarius in the tropical. So that is very interesting how different charts kind of like through my synesthesia make sense just because of like the symmetries and the correspondences that I do have. But let's try and hear more on what the documentary has to say.
Nobody in Britain understands both the natural and the synthetic human voice better than York University's electronics professor, David Howard.
The voice of the castrato worked in the same way that my voice or your voice works. This is a medical model of the larynx which shows us the basic working parts. This is the Adam's apple, the part you can feel if you move your finger up and down your throat. But if we turn it so we can see into it, we can see the vibrating structures, the vocal folds themselves. And as they open and close like this, they would be vibrating. And these vibrations are very rapid. So if this was a boy's larynx, the length of the vocal folds is around about 5 millimeters. In the case of women, it's nearer 8 millimeters, and the man, it's 1.4 centimeters. So for the boy's voice, with the small vocal cords, the boy also has a small mouth or vocal tract above that, and he is able to produce a sound which many would describe as being pure, rather simple. The woman's voice has slightly larger vocal cords, but they're working into a mouth cavity which is rather bigger. And so she is able to work with a larger range of acoustic possibilities in colouring the sound. Men sing in a range that's roughly an octave lower. The man also has a vocal tract or mouth cavity that's much bigger. But men are able to sing in the same range as the boy or woman by using what's known as falsetto. To produce a falsetto sound like that, what I'm doing is reducing the bulk of the vocal cords that are vibrating. And I'm doing that by setting the vocal folds up so that if you were looking straight into my larynx, you would see the vocal folds like this, and they would be vibrating like that. We call that full body contact of the vocal folds. But for falsetto, we pull the bulk of the vocal fold material out of the way, and only the top edges can vibrate. So we have a thick...
In her mastering or her masterclass, she describes how her voice works, and she uses the tippy top of the chord, like kind of like at a point where her voice would go into a rasp, but instead, because she claims to have the nodules, it goes into a solid tone from which you can scale up higher. And she has expressed that it's not always there for her, it depends on sleep, and like different things can affect her voice, smoke, humidity, all of those things apply just in the logic of a singer. But what is explaining about like the length of the vocal tract and how shortening it, and how the different resonance chambers for men and women create different colorings. And we just know Mariah Carey is very famous for her different registers. She famously calls one of her registers a whisper register, right? And which to her, she sometimes kind of conflates it also with like her whistle register. So it's very interesting because the way he is describing a falsetto and using a certain part of the chord, and when we just think of the tones that she has in a more full voiced type of singing versus a airy voiced light type of singing, like her airy voice definitely in tonality syncs more smoothly with her whistle notes, whereas in her prime, her lower register and her, especially like her mid belts, really gave a more brassy, full, darker tone. And when she got towards Music Box, Daydream, and they like, she gained a girlier tone and a more crystalline tone. And maybe it's because she was very disciplined with her voice. She did admit that she smoked in the past and that she gave that up when she got her record deal. So maybe like the voice just gradually cleared up, and having a consistent vocal routine in Sing Sing kind of like allowed her to develop that legato of hers, the way she was very famous for until the peak of her voice in that state in 1996, you know. In 1997, in the butterfly era, her voice did become a little lower, a little darker. On the record, she could still hit very high belted notes, but she definitely had more air to her whispery tones, and she definitely had a lower center and weight to her voice overall. And her voice just had more of an emotionally stained quality of sounding straining for certain notes, but like we were loving it all the same, because you know, at the time it was like she was being praised for this butterfly that she became, with her sultry close to the mic singing and restraint, whereas other times she was always showing off all the look what I learned in Castrati training to be the best of the best in terms of vocal virtuosity, right?
Thin string, and a thin string will vibrate at a higher frequency. The castrato voice was not falsetto. The castrati had larynxes of boys, and therefore their natural pitch range was up there with the boys and the women. But in addition, they had a man's vocal tract, so they had all the sonic timbral possibilities that a man has, and big lungs. So their power source was huge. They could sing high notes, and they could sing them for a long time.
Yeah, guys, don't feel bad if, like me, you blew out your voice trying to sing Mariah Carey songs, because as we can hear, it is literally not even like possible for the normal people to sing the types of musically demanding, extreme range, staminaed, high belting, high notes, high intensity, high velocity trills and scales and glissandos and staccatos, legatos, you name it. Like, we weren't built for that. That's all I can say, I guess. So yeah, it just makes me think of like, how do the Beyoncés do it? How do the Whitney Houstons and the Christina Aguileras and the Mariah Careys do it? While they say they have the vocal tract of a boy, but the sonic resonance cavities and acoustic bone structural developments and lung capacity and breath power, all of that comes from a man, you know. And they would still have the range of women that they had as pure boys or as young boys.
Of course, what people are really interested in is the operation. And here we've got three things with which the operation was done: a lancet, cauterizing iron, and a castratore.
Oh wow, that looks very Hathorian, and it also looks like a fish.
Would have been used to remove the whole of a child's scrotum at one fell swoop.
Oh my god. Ugh.
Could of course be heated to red heat as well to do the cut and the cauterization at once.
Oh my
That
god.
was one method.
So remember when we had Saturn conjunct Mars in one of her charts? Oh my god. And the other chart is Saturn conjunct Venus, right? So, yeah, just both of those things. Venus is semen, Mars is the phallus.
Another neater method, if one may use that word, A neater method was to use a lancet to make an incision in the scrotum in order to cut the seminal vesicles. And then this little cauterizing iron.
Now that to me is what I was talking about with the Venus retrograde conjunct Saturn in the 12th house, almost like very hospital soothing anesthesia vibes, like no, just a little snip snip, you won't feel it, and like you'll heal, and then you go on training with your mom, and one day Tommy Mattel is gonna discover you to be his Cinderella, his muse, his Celine, right? His moon star, money making star, cash cow, Taurus, vocal castrato. Guys, oh, Hathor and the milk that's coming down my claustrum right now.
Which looks like something you might crimp pastry with.
Well,
I literally thought that was a Mariah Carey song now, like it just like reminded me of something, like I think it was the song Mermaid from Georgia Brown, and I heard that song on a compilation video of high notes that Mariah Carey and other singers are like competing it out, supposedly. You know how these videos are made.
the consequence of castrating a child before puberty is huge. Testosterone comes primarily from the testes, and that loss of testosterone has innumerable effects. Obviously, you don't go into puberty properly, your voice doesn't break, you don't start growing a beard, genital development doesn't occur. They tend to grow tall because fusion of the growing ends of the bones doesn't occur, so they would have had very long arms and very long legs.
Wow, Mariah Carey is known for her Venus goddess legs.
The chest goes on growing as well. They look pale because testosterone stimulates.
We know that she's never without self-tanner, and she was very pale in her first album cover, and she blamed it on like lighting and things like that. It's very interesting, guys. And we know that on the Emancipation of Mimi, she supposedly used 24 karat gold in her body makeup or whatever she used to kind of like add a glisten to her self tanner. Just the luxury of it all, right? But that was so funny, like I heard that ain't even her real legs. I heard she got them stretched. They say that in that mini series of the Emancipation of Mimi docu-series that came out with that CD that I told you guys about.
The bone marrow to produce more blood. They obviously have abnormal fat deposition. They don't get the massive muscle enlargement which you get with a man.
I just want to hear that part again.
Loss of testosterone has innumerable effects. Obviously, you don't go into.
Let me just see this
testosterone
doctor's name.
Well, the consequence of castrating a child before puberty is huge. Testosterone comes primarily
John
from the
West,
testes,
Professor
and
of
that
Endocrinology,
loss of
Oxford
testosterone has
University.
innumerable effects. Obviously, you don't go into puberty properly, your voice doesn't break, you don't start growing a beard,
No break in
genital
the
development
voice.
doesn't occur. They tend to grow tall because fusion of the growing ends of the bones doesn't occur, so they would have had very long arms and very long legs. And the chest goes on growing as well. They look pale because testosterone stimulates the bone marrow to produce more blood. They obviously have abnormal fat deposition. They don't get the massive muscle enlargement which you get.
A normal fatty position. We know she had a gastric sleeve because her weight fluctuates a lot. She gains weight very easily, and it's interesting, all these threads. I can as a fan, I have visceral memories of just these keywords applying to the narrative that is in the media.
With a man who has normal testosterone secretion, so their whole appearance would have been hugely interesting, unusual.
They have the look of a crocodile, the grin of an ape, the legs of a peacock, the paunch of a cow, the shape of an elephant, brains of a goose, the throat of a pig, and the tail of a mouse.
For Georgian
Okay,
Britain
that
in
was-
particular, the Italian operatic castrati were a hugely problematic paradox.
That is really interesting because just what they said now, it gave a very Makara chimeric image, and just the very nasal rasp of her voice now that the quote-unquote problematic lifestyle has taken its toll on all of that alchemical purity that was to be Punarvasu Katyoni maintained.
Eve that is not understood, and songs unintelligible from complex sounds and want of articulation.
She is definitely known just for her particular way of phrasing and articulating.
And the language need not go to the entertainment, nor do they have any right to condemn those who do. The necessary part of polite education.
And songs unintelligible from complex sounds and
It was imported for precisely the same reasons that it was attacked. It was elitist, it was foreign, it was sung, it was false.
what is there to fix attention?
Very
Recitative that is
sharp
not
bishop.
understood.
Rahu
And
rules foreign
songs
things and uniqueness
unintelligible
and
from
exotic
complex
things.
sounds and want of articulation.
As the Italian language is looked upon as a necessary part of polite education, and therefore it is to be supposed understood by all in this higher rank of life, and as the Italian opera is established solely at the expense of these, they who do not understand the language need not go to the entertainment, nor do they have any right to condemn those who do.
The castrati are the epitome of Italian opera, and of course, they're also the epitome of the problems with Italian opera.
We know Mariah Carey and her mom had competing diva energy, right? So it's very interesting how she always kind of like makes fun of the luxury of being a diva because she grew up with a diva, and how it's something that she just knows she's playing into. And yeah, it's very interesting. She mentioned in her memoir that once she and her mom were kind of listening to a song on the radio while driving, and her mom sang in a very, classically trained operatic style song that, that's not how the phrasing was. It was probably like just a pop song on the radio or something. And her mom sang it like that, and Mariah laughed, and her mom told her, like, you should only hope you'd be half as good a singer as me. So, is it telling the same story as these castrati diva battles of being prima donnas amongst each other?
Opera. Castrati were halfway to becoming women. They weren't quite men. And women in the 18th century couldn't think for themselves. They were totally irrational. They needed managing by men. If castrati start influencing, and of course, they're also the epitome of the problems with Italian opera. Castrati were halfway to becoming women. They weren't quite men. And women in the 18th century couldn't think for themselves. They were totally irrational. They needed managing by men. If castrati start influencing the young dandies of the day, it could be appalling for Britain's future.
Curse on this damned Italian Pathic mode. I hate this singing in an unknown tongue. 'Tis our
This is called Satyr, like Satyr. So Satyr. Satyr on the luxury and effeminacy of the age, 1729. Interesting. Uttara Bhadrapada and luxury, effeminacy, Clearnocti's ethereal mermaid features, everything I said about satyrs and nymphs.
Reason and our senses wrong. I curse the unintelligible ass who may, for aught I know, be singing mass.
Wow. What did they say about an ass? Because we spoke about the ass, right? The golden ass. Ugh, when my YouTube freezes. Anyway, guys. Yeah, that was very interesting. I don't know what to say except that that's what they said.